Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me again, and welcome to any new viewers. This is To the Point English with Ben. I'm Ben, and today we're going to look at how to answer questions in part one of the speaking paper of the B2 First, C1 Advanced, and C2 Proficiency Cambridge English exams, also known as the FCE, CAE, and CPE. But I'm not alone today. I'm joined by a volunteer, somebody you may be familiar with, you may have seen before. It's Zdenek from Zdenek's English podcast. Zdenek, welcome to my channel.
Thank you, Ben. Always good to be here. Always good to be your guinea pig.
Exactly. You're going to be a bit of a guinea pig today. You're going to show us how or how not to answer these questions. We'll see
hmm
how it goes. But just maybe you could just introduce yourself a little bit, Zdenek, before we get started.
Yeah, so as we said, I'm Zdenek. I'm from the Czech Republic. I don't know if I should say this at this point because I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself, but I actually happen to be an English teacher
Mhm.
just like yourself. I did take the FCE exam back in 2006 or something,
Right.
something like that. So that's ages ago. So I
Yeah.
can barely remember that.
Yeah.
And then I took the IELTS exam in 2017, which, yeah, that's not that long ago, is it?
How we're going to do this is I'm going to ask Zdenek as the interlocutor three questions from each exam. So these are three typical questions from the B2 first, three typical questions from the C1 advanced, and then three typical questions from the C2 proficiency. And after each set of questions, I'm going to give a bit of feedback, and Zdenek's going to give a bit of feedback on how he felt he did. So, for those of you who don't know, part one of the speaking paper is called the interview, and it's not that complicated. Really, you just have to answer some personal questions, and it's just addressing the interlocutor. You do not speak to your partner in this part of the exam. And these questions, as I said, they're personal and they're not too challenging. But this is a very important part of the exam because you're making a first impression. This is the first time you speak to the interlocutor. So, the examiners, remember there is also an assessor in the room assessing your speaking, your grammar and vocabulary. These are human beings, so they will be affected by, if you make a good first impression, then that can set the tone for the rest of the exam. Now, this part of the exam lasts 2 minutes in total when you're with a partner. Obviously, Zdenek is on his own today, so I'm going to ask him three questions in about a minute. I'm going to give him about a minute to answer three questions. I will interrupt him if necessary, if I feel it's necessary, as the interlocutor will in the exam. That's fine. It's not a big problem. So Zdenek, don't worry. Don't take it too personally if I interrupt you. It's not, just you
I'll
just
hang
carry
up.
on.
If that happens, I will hang up,
Just
Ben.
going to leave the meeting. Yeah, how dare he? How dare he interrupt me when I'm in mid-flow? But it's part of the exam. The interlocutors have to manage the
Yeah.
time, is what I'm trying to say. So your answers should not be too short and not be too long. But as I always say, it's better to speak too much than to speak too little. Okay, so I think that's enough of an introduction. So, Zdenek, if you're ready, we're going to start with the B2 first questions. Okay, so you're taking a
I have to take a deep breath. Yeah.
deep breath to prepare. Yeah. Okay, Zdenek. First of all, we'd like to know something about you. So, Zdenek, do you prefer to spend time alone or with other people?
That really depends. I think I consider myself an extroverted person. However, I think I have changed over the recent years. I have to say, it could be due to the COVID situation. Something clicked inside of me. I don't know what it was, but these days, I think I'm not as gregarious and sociable as I used to be.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah,
Uh, Are you going to do anything special this weekend, Zdenek?
um, I think I'm going to see my friends, probably playing some board games, and possibly even see my girlfriend.
Mm. Okay,
Um, but
okay.
this can still change. It's not set in stone.
And do you ever listen to the radio?
Um, that's a good question. As a matter of fact, I do, and it's called the LBC radio, which I find quite fascinating. It's an English radio based in London, and the reason I like it is because there's no music there. It's just spoken word, and it's excellent for improving your listening skills. And you also get a lot of different views from
Okay,
ordinary people, and I quite
thank you.
like that.
Okay, so that would be the end of part one. Now you would move on to part two. Of course, in the real exam, the interlocutor would be alternating between one candidate and the other. But Zdenek just got the questions in a row, which is perhaps a little bit more difficult. It was slightly more than 1 minute, slightly longer, because perhaps the interlocutor would have interrupted you earlier for the first question. I let you speak, but it's fine. So how did you feel about that, Zdenek? How do you feel about your performance?
So what can happen to me at times is that I tend to ramble, yeah.
Hmm.
So I guess it's good that you invited me because I know your channel is called To the Point
Right, yeah.
English, yeah.
Hmm.
And I think this might be my weakness at times that I um less is more,
Hmm.
as we know, and I should keep that in mind.
It's a very common problem. It's not just you. I think maybe there are some people that ramble, in general, it's just their nature, it's the way they speak, they ramble. But a lot of people tend to ramble more in exams because, they're being evaluated and they're being asked questions and they feel that they should give long, deep answers or extended
Yeah,
answers. But it's a balance. You really need to be quite concise. So I always just say, answer the question and expand a little bit. So I think you did that, Zdenek, and I think you did it very well. So, the interlocutor will interrupt you if you ramble too much, or maybe in the interactive tasks, your partner may interrupt you. But no, it wasn't a big problem. Apart from rambling, how did you feel about the sort of grammar and
yeah, I was
vocabulary?
quite I was quite happy about using certain words such
Hmm.
as gregarious, and
Yeah,
I thought that was a good touch
yeah.
from me, and I think I even managed to squeeze in an idiom or two.
Hmm.
So that's always a positive, as long as it's done in a natural way, right? Sometimes you can always overdo it. So hopefully I didn't come across as a try hard or anything.
No, no, it was excellent. I should point out, as I said, Zdenek is an English teacher, has an excellent level of English, really good,
Oh,
really excellent range of vocabulary and uses the grammar perfectly. Although we're practicing B2 questions, these are not B2 answers. You're not expected to speak at that
mm.
level to pass the B2 first exam. If you don't use the word gregarious, you're not going to fail the exam or that type of word.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Zdenek is a very good example. But don't worry if you don't have that level. You're not expected to have that level for the B2 first. The only issue is perhaps your answers were longer than necessary, but again,
Yeah,
the interlocutor can interrupt you. You said you're maybe going to see your friends to play board games, maybe your girlfriend, but nothing's set in stone. So really
mm.
nice idiom there. Something is set in stone, then it can't be changed. It's fixed. But Zdenek was
Yeah,
saying it's not set in stone, so it's flexible. These may be changed.
to
These
be
plans
fair,
may be changed. Hmm.
uh, in hindsight, I could have used the phrase of the modal verb might as well.
Hmm. Well,
Yeah,
I might go to see my friends, or I might. Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't. You may have used it. I don't know, but it's
I
yeah.
don't think I did.
But yeah, nothing set in stone is excellent and appropriate, as you said.
Hmm.
And then the last question, do you ever listen to the radio? You said, as a matter of fact, I do. That's a nice expression, very natural, as a matter of fact. Just saying,
Hmm.
actually, I do. Yeah. You listen to LBC radio, which you find fascinating. There's no music, it's just spoken word. So it's good for your listening. And that was when I interrupted you again because the time was up. But
Hmm.
excellent, a very good start, Zdenek. You would have passed the B2 first, part one of the speaking paper.
Thank God. Thank God for that.
I should mention before we continue, usually the first question for the B2 first, C1 advanced, and C2 proficiency is where do you live? I'm not asking that for the B2 first and the C1 advanced because it is always the first question for the C2 proficiency. So it may be the
Yeah.
first question for the B2 first and C1, but it's always the first question for the C2 proficiency. So I'm a bit of a spoiler, but I'm going to ask that for the C2 proficiency. And really, also, although these are different levels, you'll see that there's not that much of a difference between the questions. the difference between a B2 question and a C2 question is not that great. So
Hmm.
because these are sort of warm-up questions, they're not designed to be too challenging. It's how you answer them that makes the difference. So,
Yeah.
okay, so let's move on to the C1 questions now, the C1 Advanced CAE questions. So again, the interlocutor would say, first, we'd like to know something about you. So, Zdenek, what do you enjoy most about studying English?
Everything. Where do I even start? I think the best thing is that it really gives you this opportunity to connect with people, especially once you get your English to a reasonably high level. Um, and I think there's a like a watershed moment when you realize you understand humor. For me, that's a point where you fall in love with the language, and it just opens so many doors for you, and it's
Okay,
amazing.
thank you. And what sort of work would you like to do in the future?
Well, as I said, I'm an English teacher, so I think the future has kind of already been written for me. And to be fair, occasionally I wonder what it would be like if I were if I did something different. But then I always come to the conclusion that I should probably stick with what I am good at and
Okay,
keep teaching English.
okay, thank you. And who do you think has had the greatest influence on your life?
Huh. Well, most people would probably say it's one of their parents or relatives, possibly a friend. But you know what? I'm going to mention Luke Thompson, another English teacher who has his famous podcast, Luke's English Podcast. I really look up to him. He has inspired me a lot over the years, and yeah, I always wanted to be like him. And
Okay,
of
thank
course,
you.
you cannot. Yeah,
Sorry, I hate interrupting, but I had to.
no,
If you
that's
wanted to
fine.
if you wanted to finish what you were saying, you can now.
No, not
But
really.
okay, okay. No, it was quite a bit over the time. That's why I had to interrupt. Really,
Yeah.
I do hate interrupting because you probably know, Zdenek, a big part of our job is to give students an opportunity to speak and space to speak and encourage them to speak. So no, when I practice or when we practice these speaking tasks and I have to interrupt, it goes against my instinct. But you have, students have to know what it's like and feel what it's like to be interrupted. Again, well, I'll start with you, Zdenek. How did you feel about that? Your answers to those questions?
Don't know, like nothing special really. Like,
Right.
it went all right.
Hmm.
Don't remember anything about it anymore. So
Okay, yeah, that's very common
that's
actually.
probably how I would feel during the exam as well. You sort
Yeah.
of like spaced out.
Well, that's not such a bad thing because when you've obviously in the exam, you're not going to sit there analyzing what you've just said and done. You just need to focus on the next task, just focus on what you're
Mm,
doing at that time. So today we have the opportunity to give feedback, but it's not something you need to do in the exam. I thought again it was very good. So the first question, what do you enjoy most about studying English? Everything. Where do I even start? The opportunity to connect with other people. And I liked it that you said it when you had that watershed moment. So watershed
yeah,
moment. How would you explain what a watershed moment is, Zdenek?
it's just some sort of milestone or moment which maybe changes the course of events or something.
Hmm.
I don't know, an important decision you make or a realization that you have or epiphany or whatever we
Hmm.
call it.
And you mentioned it was a humor when you could understand humor in English. That was important to you.
Yeah.
Again, I interrupted you probably a little bit late there. I think the interlocutor would have interrupted you earlier because it's quite a long answer, and then that
Oh.
had consequences later. But a good, very good answer. Second question was, what sort of work would you like to do in the future? You said you're an English teacher, so the future has already been written. So nice, and you'll probably stick with what you're doing. So to stick
Hmm.
with what you're doing is continue doing what you're doing, which is teaching English at the moment. And then who do you
I
think
think
has?
I even used second conditional there, didn't I? I said
Oh, I didn't
sometimes
catch
I
that.
wonder what it would be like if I were
Ah, right.
if I did something else. So I was happy about that.
Very good. I remember now you said it, and that was a very good good structure. Yeah, so bonus points for
Mhm.
that. Then the third question, who do you think has had the greatest influence on your life? You said most people would say the parents or a relative. You mentioned Luke Thompson, which maybe many viewers will know. Um, has I think it's the biggest English podcast, right? The most popular English podcast. You said you really look up to him, so he inspired you to start your podcast, and
Yeah.
so yeah, good answer. Again, I had to interrupt, but good answer. Okay, so let's move on to the big one now, the C2 proficiency. Again, it's not like these questions are suddenly really profound or philosophical. It's just that you're expected to, you know, to give answers that are appropriate for the C2 proficiency. But really, Zdenek has been giving C2 answers already for the B2 first and the C1 advanced questions.
Which means now now I'm gonna be giving you B2 answers for the C2 level
You go,
to
doing
balance it out.
everything
Yeah.
opposite. Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
The
So,
important thing, the important difference, as I mentioned earlier, between the C2 proficiency and the other two exams is that you will know if you prepare or if you've watched any of my videos on the speaking paper or you've taken my online course. The first two questions will be, where do you live and are you working or studying at the moment? So it's kind of an advantage, right? You would think that you know the first two questions, but the examiners are clever. If they feel you have prepared an answer and it's just rehearsed and robotic, you're going to lose marks. It should seem at least to be natural and spontaneous. Okay, so first of all, we'd like to know something about you. So, Zdenek, where do you live?
okay. So currently I am based in Vietnam, which is in Southeast Asia. In Southeast Asia, excuse me. And I moved here about 1.5 years ago. And I have to say, it's been an amazing journey, and I'm having a whale of a time.
Okay, thank
And
you.
yeah,
And are you working or studying at the moment?
at the moment I'm working, and I'm an English teacher. I I graduated from a university where I studied teaching, and right now I teach TEFL, so I teach adults.
Do you think it's easy for people to find a good job nowadays?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think this is a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, you've got all this technology which helps you find your job easily, right? You have different websites with filters where you can just search for literally anything. But on the other hand, perhaps we have an economic crisis. So from that point of view, there are some difficulties as well.
Thank you. Good. So yeah, that was about a minute and 15 seconds. Just finishing my notes. So good. Uh, really good. Again, your feedback, is it the same as before, or do you have anything else
Well,
to
I
say?
would say that paradoxically, the easiest questions are the toughest for me, because I feel like I should be sort of more disciplined with them, or perhaps shouldn't take it too far. And I even doubted myself with that article there. I shouldn't have done that. That
Mm.
was silly. That was silly of me. Yeah, that's unnecessary. And I would have probably even got away with a mistake there, to be fair.
Yeah, I see what you mean, but I think you dealt with it quite well. You obviously had that moment of doubt where you weren't sure if you needed an article or not when you speaking about
Yeah.
being based in the southeast of Asia or Southeast Asia. So I think that was the doubt, but you dealt with it quickly. You corrected yourself and moved on.
But I think my original answer was correct. I live in Southeast Asia. I don't think there is
Yeah.
any article there.
Well,
And the reason I started doubting myself is because I know that when you're talking about directions, you have to say in the north, in the east. And
mm,
for some reason, I don't think you say in the Southeast Asia, right?
no, it depends. You were correct, but we
Yeah.
can say in the southeast of Asia
Right.
or just
That's
in.
not what I was saying, though. Yeah, you are right.
Exactly.
You're
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
In Southeast Asia or in the southeast of
Yeah,
Asia.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, you were correct in the end. I mean, you wasted maybe a second or two. That was the only problem with that. It's often candidates in the exams, they get so they start analyzing themselves so much that they can't continue. They're kind of still thinking about a mistake they made before and can't focus on what they're doing. So you managed
And
to carry on. Yeah.
it's it's exacerbated if you are an English teacher because,
Mm.
as
Yeah.
you well know, Ben, part of your job, part of your responsibilities is to correct students, to give them feedback.
Yeah.
And so all that was going through my head, the
Yeah. Yeah.
self-correction and
No, as an English teacher, you feel more pressure, of course.
so
But again, Zdenek, I thought your answers were excellent. So you said, so the answer to where do you live? Currently based in Vietnam. You're having a whale of a time, so that's good. To have a whale of a time means you're having a really good time there, so everything's going well. Excellent. Are you working or studying at the moment? You're working, as you already mentioned, as an English teacher. You graduated from university. So I could see you were trying to expand on that answer,
yeah,
which
that
is
that
it's not
one was a
easy,
bit. I was not very comfortable answering that question for some reason, Ben. I
right?
was That one really caught me off guard.
Ready?
I have to
Okay.
be honest with you. Yeah, I thought that was my worst answer of all of those like of all those nine questions.
Perhaps,
This
yeah.
one,
Well,
this
it was
one was
perhaps the
my
most,
weakest. Yeah,
yeah, the most basic answer. He didn't use any
yeah,
particularly impressive vocabulary or grammar, but that doesn't really matter that much. I mean, of course, it's better if you do, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. But yeah, you
yeah.
said you're teaching TEFL and adult students. It's fine. And
Hmm.
then the last question, do you think it's easy for people to find a good job nowadays? You said it's a double-edged sword. You said on the one hand, you have tech technology, so internet filters to search. Um,
Yeah,
but on the other hand, I think you said it's the economic crises, I think you mentioned, if I can read
yeah,
my
yeah, yeah.
writing. Yeah.
Something
So
like that. Yeah,
that was good. Again, the important things you answered the question and expanded. I think that's the kind of dynamic you want. To almost have it automatic. You answer a question and then you expand a little, just give a little bit more information. And that's all you have to do. If you can use impressive vocabulary and grammar, fantastic. But you know, often what happens when people try to use all this impressive vocabulary, it interrupts their train of thought and they can't really even answer the question. So if it comes up naturally, as it did with Zdenek, fantastic, but don't worry about it too much. This is just the first part of the speaking paper, which has two or three more parts, so you have many more opportunities to impress the examiner. So, in conclusion, Zdenek, excellent. You passed all three tests with flying colors. So, maybe next time we can practice parts two or three or four and see if you
sure, sure.
how well
Why
you do on
not?
those. I should just mention before we finish, Zdenek's podcast. You release an episode every week, is it, or more or less? It
Um,
depends.
it's not as regular as it used to be, but let's say there's at least one, sometimes two episodes per month
Hmm.
these days. And also, I have a YouTube channel. I think I'm a little bit more active there. The YouTube channel is called Teachers Zdenek,
Hmm.
and the podcast is Zdenek's English Podcast.
So I'll link to both of those in the description to this video. So go and check
Thank you,
Zdenek
Ben.
out. Not at all.
Thanks.
Thank you for coming.